Welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast, now part of the Work Defined Podcast Network. Join us as we explore the vital role of compensation, strategy, data, and people analytics in navigating today's complex business world. With the resources of Work Defined, we're now bringing you deeper insights and actionable ideas from top experts. Now, here is your host, David Turetsky. It's always funny that I'm introducing myself, but yes, I am David Turetsky. Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. And as always, we try and find the best and the brightest people inside and outside the world of HR to talk about what's going on. And today we have the best and brightest, Alison Campbell from Unburnt. Alison, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm tired, but we're going to talk about that later.
Yes, we'll save that, but thrilled
Yes,
to
we're
be
going to say
here.
that. It's very topical. Our conversation is very topical for me. But Alison, why don't you give a little bit of background about yourself and as well about Unburnt?
Yeah, again, thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, David. So I'm the founder of Unburnt. I am new on this entrepreneurial journey. So Unburnt was born about 2 years ago out of very real lived experience. So prior to Unburnt, I spent nearly 20 years in corporate,
Mhm.
variety of operating roles from finance to e-commerce. I was at Wayfair pre and post IPO. And then in my last gig, I was at an HR tech company, first for the e-commerce side of the business. And then I moved into a chief of staff role. And through that role, I was helping to shape culture of our management team, lead strategy and analytics for this $1 billion plus
Wow.
company. And I loved it. I loved
Yeah.
collaborating with teams. I loved building new initiatives from the ground up. And at the same time, going through a global pandemic, homeschooling 2 little kids at the time,
Wow.
and then unfortunately experiencing a health scare. I was
Mhm.
not only burning out, really overwhelmed, really stressed, but I was ignoring my own personal well-being, my own health. And so that all culminated in having to have surgery in
Mhm.
2023 and really was the catalyst that kind of opened my eyes to this is completely unsustainable. That existential crisis moment of what am I doing? I've been
Yeah.
ignoring these warning signals. And it just feels like something is so far out of alignment, but I needed to take time to really figure that out. So that's the quick version.
Wow. Well, that's a heck of a very quick version. But we're going to talk about that much more later. But first, Alison, what's one fun thing that no one knows about Alison Campbell?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on this question. I love it. It's a good one. I think probably a handful of people in my family do remember this, but when I was little, I used to walk around with a sketch pad and I wanted to be a cartoonist for Disney. So I would draw. I was very creative. I always took lots of art classes and I would walk around and draw things. And I used to tell everyone, "Oh, I'm gonna be an animator, a cartoonist for Disney."
Wow. Well, that's very funny because my oldest son just graduated from the School of Visual Arts in cartooning.
So cool. Oh my
And
goodness.
my nephew just graduated from Syracuse University in cartooning.
Wow. Well, so this is why I love this question because we would have never known
Never.
that.
No. And also, I don't know if you see it, but here is my HR graphic novel called HR Datadoodles, where it's literally an HR graphic novel where that's the 6th season. We have the 7th season in production right now, where we literally draw out the issues that HR is dealing with every day. So, Alison, you're right at the heart of the world, right here, right now.
I love it. I love it.
It's funny, when I was young, I wanted to be an architect until I went to college and realized I really was really terrible at it. But I found economics and became, an econometrician, and that thus led me into comp. So we find our way in life, Alison.
We do. Absolutely. And some of those passions, they don't necessarily have to go away either.
Well, and we kind of channel those energies into other things, and that makes us who we are today. So we're going to find that cartoonist in you. I promise.
Okay. Here we go.
But today, what we're going to talk about, and you kind of mentioned it a lot in your conversation about who you are and where you've gotten to and who Unburnt is. We're going to talk about something that's very real for a lot of us and may actually get emotional because I think a lot of us are actually dealing with this right now. And it's okay. It's okay to feel this. In fact, a long time ago, I had my friend on the podcast and she and I were talking about it's okay not to be okay. We were talking about
Mm.
mental well-being, mental well-being. I'm not there yet either. Burnout is an organizational issue, and it's a critical business risk for a lot of organizations who rely on intellectual property of their very senior people. And it's not just a senior issue or an issue for senior leaders. It's an issue for all of us. It's also not just a well-being issue, but we're going to get into that right after this. So, Alison, Unburnt did a study on burnout, obviously, and it found that many employees who are actually looking really productive are probably most at risk. How did you uncover this, and what really surprised you most about this research?
Yeah, so I partnered with Bentley University Center for Health and Business because I was really interested to look at the modern drivers. So, the right now current drivers of workplace friction, of stress, including hybrid work post COVID, including AI transformation, right? It's creating lots of opportunity. And at the same time, we're so early in the change curve that it's also creating a lot of chaos inside of
Mm-hmm.
organizations. So, I was really interested to look at burnout through the lens of what's happening today in modern workplaces. Can we predict burnout by looking at system risk factors, conditions inside of teams? And then how is that impacting innovation? How is that impacting resilience, empathy, psychological safety? So we looked at a number of dimensions across a variety of validated subscales to really understand, is there a relationship? Can we predict it? And then what's the impact? And what we found, you hit the headline, not only was burnout predictive, so there were a number of risk factors that correlated extremely highly with an increase in burnout, things like uncertainty in my
Mm-hmm.
role, uncertainty with respect to the role of AI in my work. No surprise there. Well, I wasn't surprised, in doing this
Absolutely.
work. Uh, Things like ambiguity, right? So changing direction in the company goals without transparency communication, right? So things that we sort of know at large create a little bit of fear for employees came out as the top risk factors for burnout. It was predictive, statistically predictive. But what we found was that the employees that were at risk, so this population of employees that were also experiencing high burnout, at the same time, still ranked very high on what's called the innovative work behavior scale,
Mm-hmm.
which asks questions like, are you generating creative ideas? Right. And so in that scale, what we found, people were still displaying visible signs of activity. Right. So they had both visible signs of being creative, innovative, and high burnout. But what we found in that group was that they were the most likely to be at risk for lower innovation capacity. So these were questions around whether there was the ability to translate complex problems into plans. Do I have bandwidth at the end of the workday to think? So we really wanted to get at this capacity question that has really been underserved in the burnout research. So not just am I showing up, am I coming to the meetings, am I responding in Slack, but do I have the capacity to translate these plans into durable long-term company value? And the answer was in that group that was both highly burnt out and still highly active, they had the lowest capacity scores of the entire sample.
I think a lot of us tend to translate what you're talking about into, do I have time to get shit done?
Absolutely.
Like just frankly, I work so hard all day, every day. I've got back-to-back meetings on my calendar. I literally have no room to recover and to just literally get shit done. So is it a question of work style? Is it a question of, blocking time on your calendar? Everybody always says that. Well, why don't we just block time on your calendar? How many of us actually block time on our calendar to get stuff done? We don't.
Well,
Because that actually is more stressful anyways, right?
yeah. And I think what we found in this research is that actually the systemic blockers are what are creating burnout and then the downstream impacts that I just discussed. We also looked at perceived stress. And actually, in that same group with high burnout, the correlation between the perceived stress, can I handle the stressors in my life? There was no
Right.
relationship. There was really no correlation there. And so it's
Hmm.
not a personal stressor issue. And this is where sometimes this conversation gets very conflated. As you mentioned at the top of the hour, burnout is a workplace syndrome, right? And so, yes, we all have stressors, obligations, demands outside of work as well. We wanted to really look at these as two separate constructs. And so, what we're talking about here is workplace burnout. And what we found was this relationship to systemic organizational blockers. And so, just to answer your question, no, even if you are blocking time on your calendar, what we're finding is that that cognitive capacity, right? The ability to think, so to get shit done, and
Yeah.
then to,
Yeah.
have the headspace is what I'm working on, even what matters, right? Am I translating our company goals into plans that make sense? Like that's what's really eroding.
You mentioned two other things, though, which are fascinating, which is you're trying to separate the external from the internal, extrinsic from intrinsic. Well, let's just say external from internal, which is I come to work and I put my life on a shelf. We're not automatons. We're not robots. We're not
No.
AI. We can't do that. So if there is stresses like our kids sick at home and we can't take the day off or we can't work from home because of the new rules in the workplace, that's really incredibly stressful for us. There's nothing that we can do about that. It just is what it
Correct.
is. So having our ability to be our true selves and actually be at work, we can't. There's just no way to do that. We had a fight with our spouse. If we had issues going on with money and whatnot, we can't separate those things, right? I mean, it's just not possible.
We can't separate them. I think in the workplace, though, we over index on this idea that first, as you mentioned, we can put all of that other stuff on a shelf, but also it's you, the individual, that has to figure it out, right? Block your
Yeah,
calendar, be more
yeah,
productive, have better time management skills. And we're not looking at the broader system. We're not looking at, is leadership trained to identify, when there are risk factors? What are those risk factors in the context of our business? Are we clearly communicating the plans? Do we
right,
have
right.
kind of a top-down strategy with respect to AI, or are we just telling everyone, go figure out AI, right? So these are the things that came out in the research that were leading to workplace burnout and ultimately impacting the ability for those employees to be innovative for the long haul.
I'm sure it also doesn't help that there's a lot of talk and a lot of actual communication from other companies saying we're cutting 4,000 employees, we're cutting
Yeah.
8,000 employees. The US federal government just went through a gigantic shakeout of a ton of people, and a lot of people are struggling to find a job. And so this sort of Damocles hanging over everybody's head going, when am I going to be affected by this? And if organizations aren't communicating, and they're not being communicative about not just their financial condition, but also how do we leverage those things you were talking about and how we're getting stuff done today. That must cause a tremendous amount of impact because the black hole of information that's surrounding all those things are really critical for people to operate it efficiently.
Absolutely. And we know, there's so much research on the impact of chronic stress, right? And so we're talking about workplace burnout as the driver. But as human beings, when we are stressed, it impacts our cognitive capacity for decision making and rational thinking, even empathy, our ability to collaborate well with other colleagues, right? So this is all impacted, and unfortunately, that then translates into impacting business results, right? So this really is sort of a workplace organizational challenge to solve for. But again, we kind of fall back on, well, just be better with your time.
And then that gets us to our second question, which is then it becomes the realm of HR, right? Now that it's a workplace productivity issue and it's not it's people taking care of people, then it becomes HR's realm. And how does HR really deal with this beyond just being a wellness issue and saying, hey, if you need, we have an EAP for you to deal with all this stress?
Yeah. So I think increasingly, I mean, what this research is pointing to, and the work, the conversations, just really the sentiment, like talking to HR leaders and really kind of getting a temperature on how everyone's feeling. I think framing this through the lens of operational risk, right? This is
Right.
not just HR's problem to solve. And yes, it is absolutely a people challenge.
Yeah.
This is an organizational risk. And so therefore, how are we mitigating actually, let me take a step back. We're talking so much about AI transformation, right? We're talking about this huge technological shift, which is inherently very human, right? We
Mhm.
need
Yeah.
humans to implement and to translate
Yeah.
and to, figure out how we're going to work
Right.
alongside this new technology agents and how the work is changing so rapidly. And so it's not just a tech stack investment, it's got to also be a people investment, but it
Yeah.
can't just be siloed and relegated to this one sort of department.
So I'm sure you saw it. It's hysterical to me, but there were a couple of companies that implemented these plans which said that if you don't use artificial intelligence for a percentage of your job and you don't use your credits, you are at risk of being let go. So what people did was they started throwing garbage into AI, basically throwing
Yes.
the kitchen sink into AI to kind of say, okay, that's what you want? Great. I'm going to put everything in that basket and totally overwhelm the AI from a garbage perspective and wasted tons of money because we all know AI is not free. Credits cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so this kind of business strategy of let's use AI for everything, but it doesn't solve customer problems. But that wasn't what was asked. What was asked was if you're not using artificial intelligence, you're not on the leaderboard, quote unquote,
Right.
then you're not doing your job.
Yes, I did see that. I think is a classic example of not designing with the outcome in mind, right? What are we actually trying to solve for? And so
Right.
it's unfortunate because what a waste of money, what a waste of creative resources. And
What a great lesson, though, Allison.
yeah,
What a great
absolutely.
lesson. You know, and you're probably not old enough. I'm not going to cast aspersions, but when I was very young in the working world, there wasn't a computer on every desk. And one of the concerns that people had, especially in the HR world, is, well, how is this thing, this computer sitting on my desk going to make me more effective? And the answer is we found lots of ways of making it more effective. And some of us who are computer people, I've been a computer person since I was 13. No no geek jokes there necessary. I am a geek. It's okay. But one of the fascinating things about it is that we figured it out. With artificial intelligence and the tools available to us, it's not as easy to figure it out because yes, we've been working in a gloomy world forever. But in some ways, that's made, like, going back to the topic of conversation, it's burnt us out even more
Hmm.
because there are a lot of things we just don't know. And if we have to Google everything all the time and we're going to use AI all the time, where do we begin? Where does the work begin and end with us? And I think a lot of people are worried that artificial intelligence, if we start putting all of the way in which we work into AI will figure out and do it for us. And the answer is that's just not true right now. We can use it as tools. And it's not really helping on the burnout side because we're spending a lot of cycles on it. Anyways, I'm totally off topic now, so I apologize profusely. But
No.
how does HR figure this out other than to develop these terrible programs which are, hey, use AI for everything and then find out that, we just wasted a ton of money.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting, certainly that sort of came out in the data and the research, but again is sort of reinforced through conversations I'm having every day. It's about leadership. It's about employees feeling supported. It's about culture. So some of this, I pause there for a minute because I don't want to gloss over it like it's easy. This is certainly not easy stuff, but it is a moment to think about how are we going back to basics? How
Mm.
are we really focusing on developing our leaders, thinking about how because sometimes I'm talking to groups and they're like, wait, but before we talk about my team and my employees, like I'm burnt out too, right? And so
Exactly.
the leaders are
Yeah.
overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
so I think it's about leadership development, arming them with the skills required today, right? In this kind of changing landscape, but building in this notion of personal capacity, operational capacity in the flow of work, acknowledging that there are systemic barriers. It's very contextual depending on the business, the stage you're in, number of employees. Are you global? Are you all sitting
Right.
in one office together?
Right.
But based on all of those conditions for your unique organization, measuring, what are those blockers? What are those signals that are potentially predicting burnout, right? Let's not wait for the exit interviews. Let's not wait till we see performance starting to slide. How are we baking in the right diagnostics? How are we really developing our leaders and having ongoing conversations from the top down, so the board, the C level, are we super clear, right? And consistently providing transparency around what the goals are. None of us have a crystal ball, so we can't say remove
Well,
uncertainty,
right.
but there is a case to be made for early and often communicating, hey, we don't know what next quarter is going to look like with respect to ABC variable. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's what we do
But
know.
sorry to interrupt, but
No,
Allison,
no.
when you start at the board level then, because ostensibly what you're saying is that leaders are also caught up in this. They have this infection, which is burnout.
Yes.
Is it, listen, I might be best off if I went as the HR, as the leader in the HR world, to go to the board and go, hey, listen, we've seen that there have been some health issues with, especially with our leadership team. And throughout the organization, we know that people are working ridiculous hours and putting in a lot of work. We have a solution, which is we need to start uncovering this. Wouldn't it be best to go to the board and
Yeah.
talk about it from an operational risk perspective, as you said before,
Yes.
rather than just being an HR perspective? And yes, it's HR carrying that mantle, but they really have to, because unless you have a best friend in the CLO's office, who's going to uncover it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are conversations that need to be happening in the boardroom. I think you nailed it.
Well, I mean, that's kind of depressing because, you know, knowing that you have this problem means that you're ready to work on it. It's kind of an awareness issue. And it would be great if you could go to your CEO and say, I think we have a burnout problem. With them not looking back at you going, well, we pay them fairly. They have opportunity to use our health and welfare. We pay for a lot for health and welfare. They should be using that. I feel like that is a blocker in this, that, leadership would kind of just all of a sudden go, this is a well-being issue.
I think, again, very contextual based on the business, but, looking at utilization, right? Is our EAP being used? Are, the resources we're providing, is it providing benefit? And are we seeing over, a period of time, the risks decreasing or, the sentiment getting better? And if the answer is
Right.
no, then what you have in place perhaps isn't doing it.
Right.
And so I think there is a little bit of a look back. I think that unfortunately, burnout, overwhelm, stress in work is still highly stigmatized. So one of the challenges here is that it's really, really
Oh,
tough
yeah.
for managers, leaders, all the way sort of up the org to get the real perspective. Even, sometimes in employee engagement surveys, people are kind of,
Yeah.
there's this fear. Can I really provide the real detail
Yeah.
here? Will they
Yeah.
be able to
Can I open
pinpoint it
up?
was me? Exactly. Can I open up? I mean, certainly managers can't come into a touch base and say like, so you burnt out today? It's just not, it's not
You
happening.
you got bags on your eyes, David.
So if we're not getting the feedback in anonymous surveys, if we aren't having the conversations, and increasingly we're in this climate where it's really risky. We're worried. You mentioned it, job security. We're worried about, is my role going to change, go away? And so unfortunately, it means that sometimes leadership, even at the board level, isn't seeing the full picture. And so that's why some
Yeah.
of these hidden signals, right? Having diagnostics that start to get at, okay, what are the things that are predictive, right? And what are some of the new things we need to be looking for, measuring that is not, well, they're still coming, they're smiling, they're generating ideas,
Right.
right? Like that's not having this kind of old finger on the pulse, walking around the office, they're showing up, seats are
Yeah.
filled.
Yeah.
That's not what we need to be looking at anymore.
Well, we also have an aging workforce, and that aging workforce, like I'm 59 years old. I'm not getting any younger. And I still have at least 10, 15 years so that I have to work in the most productive I can be. But I'm certainly not as productive. Well, in some cases, I'm a hell of a lot more productive now than I ever have been. But I would argue that, as we get older, our bodies just start telling us these signals and saying, you need to work differently.
Hmm.
And I wonder if it makes sense to talk about, before we move on to the third question, to talk about does this change your thought process at all based on demographics of who we are and how old we are and where we are in our demographic cycle in the US?
I think a little bit. We're continuing the research. One of the things we're really keen to look at next and dig into is the role of caregiving, not just
Mm,
am I a parent, but elder care, right?
yeah,
So for a demographic increasingly kind of the sandwich generation, I would even
yeah,
argue generations now, right? Where
yeah,
aging parents, potentially, sick family members are part of that
oh
care
yeah,
composition. I think that's something that we need to pay attention to because the point you made earlier around obligations, stressors outside of work are very real.
yeah. My best friend down in Florida had to take care of her mom until her mom passed away, and it was an incredible stress on her,
Mhm.
having caregivers come in and out of the house and some of them
Mhm.
having to get fired and whatnot. And I moved back to New York because my mom is getting older. And so, you know, you're right. I am definitely, and me and my friends are definitely in that sandwich generation of we've got stresses not only at work, but we also have to take care of our families above and below us. So,
Exactly. And that's a very real demand on time. It's an emotional, sort of burden, one we all
yeah,
want to bear, but it is, something that when you're in your 20s and you just kind of like hustling through and working, it's
yeah,
all about you. Those aren't things that you have to consider. So I think just even before we talk about the personal capacity, your personal productivity as we age individually, there are additional, demands on our times. I think absolutely. So we're interested in the research to dig into that, to look at and really
yeah,
segment what's happening generationally, because there's even different
yeah,
philosophies and approaches with how
absolutely.
each of the generations are kind of showing up and what their expectations are with respect to work, their
Yeah.
employers and culture.
We're going to have to ask you back once that research is done because I'm over to hear the answer. What am I supposed to do?
Well, stay tuned.
Exactly. Well, I certainly will. But so if you're an HR person, and let's get to the third question. If you're an HR person and you're sitting there and you're saying, "Okay, where do I start? What do I do? Where do I go? What do they do? What does an HR leader do now that they've heard about this? How do they move forward?"
Yeah. So I think, we touched on it a little bit, but I think there's a first piece around taking stock, right? What do I have in place? What's my current diagnostic toolkit look like? How are we measuring? Do we have surveys sort of out there? Are
Right.
they annual? Are they quarterly pulse checks? But, again, really taking stock. Like, what data do I have? What programs are in place, and then kind of doing a look back. Are these things working? Are we seeing trends where, there was sentiment about burnout post layoff 2 years ago, but now it's sort of it's been alleviated. So there is a first piece I think around just awareness and a general acknowledgement of where are we. But again, I would say that even if you have certain things in place, and even if you've got some diagnostic tools that you think are measuring listening, there might be an opportunity to take a look and see, are there different types of questions we need to be asking? Are there different measurements? So I would offer free resource, our paper, right? We
Yeah.
have a number of different risk conditions that are sort of explained in how we uncovered this predictive relationship between, and they clustered around three things: environment, culture, and the operations, right? So
Hmm.
three different kind of constructs. Do we think we have a good pulse on, if any, are these risk factors in place for our organization?
Hmm.
And so I think it's beginning to look at the shifting tides here, within the organization and just ask the question, or, do we have the right measurement tools in place?
And I will definitely put a link to your research in the show notes. So I think you actually provided that already. But I think one of the other things that we would suggest you do is probably have honest conversations with the C-suite. You're the head of HR, you're
Yes.
the senior leader in HR. Have conversations with your C-suite about stress and ask them, is this something we should, well, I would not ask. I would tell them we should be talking to the board about this.
Yeah.
We should be talking about how we work and what we do to support our organization because this is a stressful time. This is an there's economic pressures, there's a war going on, there's political infighting, there's social unrest. There's a lot of things that every single person is going through who work for us. We can't lose sight of the fact that they're people. And so we should be talking to the board about how do we support our employees, not just from a compensation and HR perspective, but from this operational risk perspective, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they got to be thinking that, yeah, we can do diagnostics, but we also have to go to the board and say, hey, listen, I think we need to do stuff, but first we need to do more research on this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think these are board level conversations. These are conversations that, senior HR leaders need to be having with their peers, right? Getting that anecdotal feedback. So yeah, gathering the intel, if you will, is
Yep.
absolutely step one. I think that's to have an informed conversation. Like, what are we doing today? What new things might we want to look at? But absolutely, this is a board level, C-level future durability of our company conversation that needs to be had.
You also mentioned a few times about communication and the proactive communications that are probably necessary to ensure that employees understand the goals of the company and understanding where we are and how healthy we are and things like that. Do you tend to see, especially from senior HR leaders, that there's with higher burnout, there are less conversations and less communication going on?
Yes. Yes. This vacuum of communication with respect to the goals, progress relative to those goals, when there are lots and lots of pivots happening, right? So we thought we were working on one thing. It's okay to change, right? We need to be agile, but without rationale or
Right,
reasoning behind these constant pivots,
right.
yes, it's typically that vacuum of information where there's a lot of uncertainty, fear. Uh, there's sort of a questioning, or do senior leaders even sort of understand where we're going strategically? And that absolutely is correlated very highly with burnout.
Well, HR's got a lot of work to do, and we're definitely not going to solve world peace on this conversation. But I think what we might need to do, Allison, is bring you back again to talk about your new research and talk about what you find from not only the current research, but also the added research on demographics so that we can, give them a little bit more basis for, gosh, this is how to deal with burnout in this really crazy society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is not one solve. I think that this is something that, collectively, so many of us are trying to figure out. So I would love to come back. I would love to illuminate more of what we find in this next wave of research, but these
Cool.
aren't easy problems to solve.
No, they're not. But thanks to you, they're getting the light of day. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And thank you all for being here. Take care and stay safe. Thank you for listening to the HR Data Labs podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe and share it with your network. You can also check out the recordings on Spotify or the HR channel, now on Roku and Fire TV. Thank you, take care, and stay safe.